It is a difficult thing to get people to believe in your cause. It is a much more difficult thing to ask them to fight, and very likely, die for it. Andor might be my favorite piece of Star Wars media, and I think one key element of what makes the show so compelling is how it digs into the personal reasons for rebellion. It takes Cassian, a talented lowlife, and sets him on a trajectory to join a resistance movement against a galaxy-spanning empire in a way that's entirely believable. It's one of the few Star Wars properties that actually invests in its characters. One of my channel's first videos was on Riley Rethal's Galactic 2E, a game whose whole premise is, what if Star Wars treated its characters properly? But in this video, I want to talk about an expansion to Galactic, Jess Levine's Going Rogue, and how it portrays what comes after joining the cause. While Andor shows us how everyone fights their own personal rebellion, Going Rogue predates the TV show, and draws its inspirations largely from Rogue One. And the rebellion of Rogue One is not one of definitive victories and medal ceremonies. The characters we follow through Rogue One are the ones we meet after having lived through the events of Andor. They know what it means to believe in a cause, and they know that fighting for it is a very hard thing indeed. Going Rogue is a game that examines this cycle of radicalization, rebellion, and cynicism, predicting the arc Cassian Andor would trace throughout the TV show. It highlights both the necessity of ideologues, as well as the ways a prolonged struggle grinds them down. And through its mechanics and themes, illustrates the ways in which liberatory movements are built on the backs of people who trust them the least. In Rogue One, our protagonist Jyn Erso is not exactly a willing participant in the fight against the Empire. She was drafted into Saw Gerrera's partisan movement as a child, got sent to prison, and then was essentially kidnapped by a rebel security droid before the whole thing with her dad got explained. Similarly, at the beginning of Andor, Cassian's first rebel mission is not one he joins because he's brimming with rebellious fervor. He needs money quite badly, and the guy who saved him from the cops is willing to hire him. This is how both of these programs introduce our main characters, as people who join the rebellion not out of ideological commitment, but because of circumstance. Going Rogue has a class for this kind of character, the Leveraged. During character creation, there's a list of reasons why they might have been put in this position: an impounded ship, a chance to see a loved one again, or their own guilt. Pretty normal stuff, but I think it's an interesting way to frame the protagonists of two different Star Wars media. When you think of the Rebel Alliance, you might think of Luke Skywalker in his orange flight suit, committed to the cause as soon as the bones of his family cooled off. Or you might think of Leia Organa, daughter of a key Rebel figurehead, a member of the Resistance basically since birth. Jyn and Cassian look pretty shabby by contrast. However, through time, experience, and the familiarity fostered by working toward a shared goal, these characters undergo a change of heart. Though their commitment is grudging at first, both Cassian and Jyn end up as critical members of the rebellion. Hell, if Rogue One is to be believed, the Death Star doesn't get destroyed without their direct intervention. Throughout both of their respective media properties, we see Jyn and Cassian radicalize, meet people and see things that turn them into believers. And when it comes to Cassian, he's become the kind of person who brings other people into the fold. The arcs of these characters establish a pattern of rebel recruitment. Sure, there's folks like Nemec, who Going Rogue would classify as a convert, people who have been gung-ho for the struggle since day one. But for the vast majority of people, it's kind of a big step to pick up a blast rifle. Maybe you're not a die-hard Imperial bootlicker, but especially for Cassian, he has no dog in this fight. Yes, he's suffered at the hands of the Empire. They publicly executed his dad. So when Season 1 of Andor opens, he has no illusions about what happens to the people who try to resist. Even after Luthen leverages him, he still wants out. It takes the trauma of imprisonment and the death of his mom for him to completely commit. There is another caveat to the narrative I'm trying to establish here, and it's that Levine herself takes umbrage with the way Jyn Erso actually gets on board with the rebellion. Sure, she is eventually leveraged into working with the Resistance, but in my conversations with Levine, she notes that there's not really a good reason for this change of heart. Jyn goes from resigned acceptance of the Empire to accusing the High Council of rolling over in submission. I do agree with Levine's criticism. It does seem like Jin goes from being pretty checked out to fully committed, despite the fact that a rebel strike team just exploded her long-lost dad. That said, I think the cycle is still largely intact. As Nemik's manifesto says, the Imperial need for control is an abomination. It is so fundamentally wrong that eventually, the dams burst. Resistance becomes as necessary as water. Though Jin may not have an incredible reason to join the rebels, I'm willing to believe that watching the annihilation of Jedha could have been her boiling point. This remains true for the majority of characters in Rogue One, as well as the members of the Ferrix mining colony. Random acts of insurrection occur constantly. Whole armies begin to enlist in the cause without knowing. One way or another, people on the fringes turn, and instead of grudgingly following the rebels, they end up leading the charge. Great. We've got Cass and Jin on board. We're ready to give the Empire hell. What next? Well, this is where things get a little tricky. Because the problem with resistance movements is that there are lots of diverse and opinionated people who make them up. And while it's mostly great, it does come with some notable drawbacks. There are a lot of different strategies and ideologies about the best way to defeat Empire, and they are often at odds with each other, even when they are ostensibly on the same side. Unfortunately, this creates a lot of intra-factional conflict that ultimately hampers the goal of defeating the enemy. It's hard to see the forest when all the trees annoy the hell out of you. In Star Wars media, the best representation of this sort of internal division is the split between Mon Mothma and Saw Gerrera. In Going Rogue, Mon Mothma's branch of the rebellion, the diplomats and public figures, are called the Parliament. The text portrays the Parliament as interested in the best ideals of the rebellion. It is committed to democracy. It gives representation to the vast coalition of people and beliefs required to win this fight. It is a miniature version of what just governance across the galaxy could be. It is also limited in its scope and efficiency. When you look at the Parliament's desires, you see things like guaranteed victories, safety for the innocent, and lengthy deliberation. Well, in principle, these are all well and good, but when fighting a war, these concepts are luxuries. There is no such thing as a guaranteed victory. Thorough deliberation wastes valuable time, and unfortunately, the innocent are always going to be caught in the crossfire. Across the franchise, we see how these desires take shape through Mon Mothma's eyes. In Rogue One, Mon refuses to authorize a mission to capture the Death Star plans without the full support of the Rebel Council. In Rebels, Mon Mothma shies away from direct action in favor of covert operations, hesitates to support herself with the Alliance's full strength. I can't even necessarily fault her logic. Half the time her intel is coming from some bright-eyed newbie who joined the rebellion like last week. She's been in this fight since episode 3. She knows what happens when you trust talented young people with laser swords. Her caution is understandable. And it's also her greatest weakness. Saw Gerrera stands on the opposite side of this dichotomy. Where Mon Mothma is practical and stoic, Saw is reckless and zealous. I was first introduced to the character in Rogue One, where he sicks what the A More Civilized Age podcast calls a torture snuffleupagus on an Imperial defector. Saw's whole construction as Mon Mothma's narrative foil highlights the extreme and violent methods he employs, but no one can deny he gets results. At the same time, his extremism also manifests as paranoia and exclusion. In Andor, Saw rebuffs Luthen's request to assist a friendly cell, rattling off a list of anti-Empire factions who he all labels as lost. His ideological purity may have him running the most lethal partisan group in the galaxy, but his fight is often a lonely one. In Going Rogue, we see this militant wing of the rebellion in the intelligence pillar. For example, some of the intelligence's desires are things like the heads of mandate officials, reduced oversight, and leverage over liberation members. These desires, while unpleasant, are all facets of the rebellion present in Star Wars media. We already discussed in the previous section the ways in which the rebels strong-arm people into their cause. Plenty of Imperial blood has been spilled between Saw, Luthen, and Cassian. And when it comes to reduced oversight, both Saw and Cassian are known to have used unscrupulous methods to fight the Empire. Saw by torturing prisoners, and Cassian by cutting loose ends. This is the dilemma the intelligence highlights. It's possible to do great evils in pursuit of justice, and difficult to walk that line without treading over it. In the tempo of a belonging outside belonging game, the intelligence exists to push the players toward those ethical quandaries. Levine uses this pillar both as an incentive to push characters into action, as well as to stand in for rebels who put the moral necessity to fight against the Empire above all else. But merely describing these two halves of the rebellion is not enough. Instead of seeing yourself on one side or the other, imagine what it's like for the vast majority of the rebels, which is to say, to be caught in between two competing philosophies of resistance. You know you're fighting for a just cause against an impossibly cruel enemy. You know that the things you want are objectively good for the galaxy. You want to free people from a transparently evil empire. And yet, you're in an incredibly stressful and dangerous position, often risking life and limb for people who will never thank you, and might even resent your work. Now imagine after you come home from a payroll heist or a guerrilla raid, and you have to go to a meeting where the most important people in your organization have the same fight they've had 100 times, a fight that undermines the whole mission you just risked your ass for. I can't imagine it's an especially fun experience. While intra-organizational conflict is not necessarily a net negative, it is often the case that real-world organizations that dissolve do so due to irreconcilable ideological and tactical differences within them. There's a reason Saw works alone, after all. This is the position the players of Going Rogue are facing, and it's why, as you dig deeper into the playbooks, you realize the rebellion is riddled with cynics. The spy is probably the most conflicted of all classes in the game. Especially when you examine their vulnerable moves, the spy is in an emotionally difficult frame of mind. Lying to comrades about their intentions, causing collateral damage, telling someone that the mission is more important than any one individual, these all suggest a commitment to the cause one would expect from a fanatic. But at the same time, that one of their moves is to vent misgivings about your orders suggests that they are not at all certain about their cause. This aligns pretty closely with Cassian's arc in Rogue One, where he's ordered to kill Galen Erso without Jin's knowledge, where he later confesses that he knows he's done terrible things and is yearning to do something right. The spy playbook also has a character hook built into it about principles they've already broken, things as dark as allowing harm to come to a child. Or perhaps they've forgone retribution against someone who absolutely deserved it. The spy is always going to have to make tough choices. Subterfuge and secrecy demand discernment over justice. But despite the righteousness of your cause, the shots you maybe should have taken eat at your soul. The leverage is already pretty cynical. They inherently do not want to be part of the fight. Their selfishness, or perhaps sense of self-preservation, can be observed in their ability to free only themselves, or guilt someone into helping them. Their vulnerable moves, too, underline their sense of frustration. Say, why should I care? Ask a player or pillar, how can you take advantage of me? In including the leveraged in your party, the rest of the players are going to have to come to grips with the fact that they're doing something that is, on its face, pretty scummy. Jyn Erso fulfills this role in Rogue One because, while she is certainly rescued from Imperial prison, she's more or less still a captive. She agrees to the Jedi mission because of its personal connection to her past, but when I see the vulnerable move, tell someone why you had it worse than them, I think about how Jyn accuses Saw Gerrera of abandoning her at 16 with nothing but a knife and a blaster. Cassian may have been in this fight since he was 6 years old, which Andor reveals to be a straightforward lie. But Jyn has, in fact, seen as much shit as him. She's done the partisan guerrilla thing, and it didn't work out for her. When the rebels capture her, her bitterness is very understandable. This movie came out a year after The Force Awakens, a film in which the protagonist was also forced to join a military group from a young age. And the people who did that to him were the bad guys. That Rogue One can draw that parallel to the First Order makes it a more interesting film, but it also makes you feel for poor Jyn, and subsequently for the rebels she's partnered with. How can you claim to be on the right side while simultaneously bargaining with a woman's freedom? I'm not saying this move was wrong. In the end, coercing Jyn into this mission ended up saving the galaxy. But for the operatives who have seen this move pulled time and time again, I imagine it gets hard to justify, especially when the results are less than heroic. Going Rogue presents us with an angle beyond the struggle between Rebellion and Empire in the form of the Knight Errant playbook. However, just because the Knight isn't necessarily involved in the Galactic Civil War, doesn't mean they don't also have a reason to be cynical. Inspired by Cheriton Bays, the knight-errant is a Ronin figure, someone who has abandoned a cause they once held dear. In Rogue One, the pair guards the remains of the Temple of the Kyber. This is particularly ironic because not only has their temple been reduced to rubble by the Empire, but also the same Kyber they once defended is now being used in a genocidal superweapon. Baze and Cher are absolutely allowed to be cynical. In the same way, the knight-errant is also struggling with the cause they abandoned. Whether they betrayed the cause, or the cause betrayed them is up to player interpretation. But I think the image of a wandering knight, aching for a master to serve, is a powerful one. Of the playbooks, the knight-errant is most on the edge, caught between a noble ideal and the reality of their lived experience. Their principles hound them. They truly believed in something once, but at the same time understand how belief is not enough. For example, the knight could have once been a Jedi, sworn to fight for the oppressed until their comrade perished. On the other hand, they could have also been a soldier of the Empire, someone who defected when a mission went bad, but still hasn't taken responsibility for their actions. These layered conflicts and loyalties make the knight-errant a terribly interesting playbook, one that absolutely has a place in the troubled resistance. They know all too well what happens when earnest commitment bends principles in exchange for action. The fact that so many of these playbooks want readers to grapple with fundamental tensions present in the work of liberation is by design. Levine cites her personal experience in anti-fascist organizing as a touchstone while writing the game. In fact, the game was originally designed around the 3 playbooks we just discussed, and each of them reflects aspects of Levine's struggles while engaged in political resistance. This disillusionment with an important cause is a sadly common phenomenon. It is estimated that between 50 and 60% of activists experience some form of burnout. This emotional strain is worsened by a culture that accepts burnout as par for the course, that views discussing one's own mental state as a luxury. When your cause is as serious as human rights or the liberation of millions, and in Star Wars' case, trillions, of people, it's understandable that one's emotions get pushed to the side. There's a line in the opening of Going Rogue that brought my attention to the concept of cynicism. Levine writes about the questions she hopes to provoke with the game, and the first one listed is, how does cynicism serve us as a coping mechanism? And I found that a profound and difficult thing to answer. I asked her to elaborate on this idea, that cynicism might be useful, and her response surprised me.
I'm not sure I would say that cynicism is useful, though I would say it serves certain uses. I make that distinction in the same way that I might say that cults always serve a particular use in the lives of cult victims, without saying that cults are useful. When we face a political situation so overwhelmingly bleak as our current one, it's tempting to retreat into that cynicism. When we engage in political action and lose, something that's an inevitable stop on the road to liberation, it's tempting to retreat into cynicism to avoid the pain of that loss ever again. In the face of all that failure, it's really tempting to say, we can't win. And if we can't win, I can't be disappointed by losing, because I knew it was going to happen.
It's a poignant answer, and also one that complicates the situation of Going Rogue, in which your rebel cell is jaded and tired. It would be much easier to accept the inevitability of defeat, kinder to extinguish the flame of hope in your heart than to keep it burning despite all you've lost. Perhaps an eternity of submission is better than doing the right thing and getting ash in return. But if there's something Star Wars has repeatedly hammered into us over the last 50 years, it's that evil cannot succeed so long as there is hope for a better future. The rebellion, as established so far in this essay, is desperate for a spark that can keep their flame alive. And as the arc of Rogue One shows, they succeed in fanning that flame. This unlikely coalition of burnouts and cynics infiltrates an Imperial base, finds the Death Star plans, and ultimately manages to destroy the superweapon. It's arguably the rebellion's greatest victory in the series. But how did they accomplish such a win with fragmented leadership and exhausted fighters? How did a group of deeply jaded people go from grudging acceptance to martyrdom? I think the thesis of Going Rogue is that, frankly, they don't. I said in the earlier section that Going Rogue originally started with only 3 playbooks, but Levine found that the cynicism in those classes was insufficient to bind a team together. They needed someone unmarked by the long history of conflict, someone with bright eyes and an uncomplicated belief in the cause. They needed the convert. The convert playbook describes a character that only recently signed up with the rebels, someone with the unbridled optimism only naivete can summon. They're a pretty funny playbook. It's very fun to imagine a happy-go-lucky newbie yakking the ear off of a grizzled veteran. Their repertoire of moves leans into this characterization. They have incredible beginner's luck, but they're also overconfident, and can absolutely be tricked by people who want to hurt them. I think the closest Rogue One analog you can make to the convert is Bodhi Rook, but I bet the introduction of Karis, Nemik, and Andor had Levine cheering at how hard she nailed this archetype. It's Nemik's naive optimism that makes the convert critical to the entire game. Levine writes that the convert was the class that ended up giving the rest of the rebel cell a reason to stick together. The convert is an echo of her as a younger organizer, someone unburdened by leadership struggles and the glacial pace of progress. They're the beating heart of the movement, and you can see that intention in their verbs. Their strong moves are about inspiring people who are discouraged, and convincing others to join the fight. And their other moves are also centered on the best aspects of resistance. They can remind people about why the principles of their movement matter, can even question their comrades when they feel they went too far. It's the earnest belief that the rebellion is an unalloyed good that makes the relationship of the convert to the rest of the playbooks work. Especially in the moral universe of Star Wars, where things are so often boiled down to the bad guys have red swords, Andor, Rogue One, and Going Rogue navigate a more complex version of what it means to do the right thing. By posing more dynamic questions about resistance, the place of revolutionary violence, treatment of enemy combatants, acceptance of civilian casualties, they raise genuine and compelling questions that confront the convert's simplistic understanding of the struggle. At the same time, those other more conflicted playbooks draw strength from the convert's convictions. It's people like Nemik, people whose sincere commitment is stronger than their doubts, that pull people like Cassian from being mercenaries into full rebels. The convert will not always be correct, and perhaps time will make them as jaded as the rest of the crew. But at the moment of play, they can inspire others to fight for the best version of the cause they can imagine. Sadly, that inspiration serves a dual purpose. Sometimes the crew is inspired to commit their lives to something great, and sometimes their principles are so strong that they must die for them. Star Wars as a piece of media is riddled with heroic sacrifices. Starting with Ben Kenobi's last duel with Darth Vader, the sacrifices in Rogue One and Andor feel different to me. There's no reuniting with the Force. There's no grand monastic tradition that gives them calm in their last moments. These are folks that are coming to the end of a long road, an end they suspected was in their stars when they joined up with the rebellion. Only a fool could look at the might of the Galactic Empire and believe it could not touch them. For people like Cassian and Jyn, their last moments are peaceful. They at least get to die knowing they'd done their duty. For people like Nemik, like Anto Krieger, like the dozens of nameless soldiers who perished on the beaches of Scarif, they died uncertain. It's a hard way to go out. Going Rogue introduces the concept of a fate near the end of the book. It's a way to mechanize the power of the Force to influence the narrative. Perhaps your character is destined for tragedy, as we see with Anakin Skywalker. But perhaps they're fated for redemption, like Darth Vader. But as a piece of game design, it's a way to signpost to players that they ought to be thinking about the arc of their story, even if they don't necessarily know where it's going from the beginning. However, the only example of a group fate given in the game is the sacrifice fate. As a game modeled off of Rogue One, it makes sense, but it is still a grim reminder of the cost of resistance. When characters accept the sacrifice fate, they take on a final narrative burden, one I interpret as death, and give the rest of their tokens to the other characters that chose this fate. The resulting token cascade gives the last survivor of the cell a ton of fictional power, allowing them to end the mission on their terms. It's both emotionally and mechanically powerful, and a decisive way to bring your game to a satisfying conclusion. Despite Going Rogue's solid narrative construction, I personally struggle a great deal with stories that end in martyrdom. I was taught from a very young age that there is no greater love than to lay down one's life for a friend. And all across media, from religious myths to immortalized histories, the idea that one should die for their cause is pervasive. In the end, all you have is your one life, and to offer it up so that not just a person, but an idea can survive, is compelling. But I also know that martyrdom alone cannot save the world. It can often be a heroic act, but it is a final one. And movements that create lasting change are ones that persist. I asked Levine about her thoughts on martyrdom versus living to fight another day. She gave a very thorough answer that is too long to put in this video, one that I've edited for brevity's sake. But she brought up a point that resonated with me, which was essentially that the idea of martyrdom, that when things get bad enough, that'll be the time to give everything, can hold people back from what they should be doing now.
The harder work in a lot of ways is the consistent work, and that will take years and we will lose multiple times in the process. And then we'll get there. That is 99% of the important work.
This answer comes with the caveat that Levine knows she's doing very different work from people, especially those in Palestine, who are actually engaged in violent revolutionary struggle for freedom. But in the context of going rogue, I thought it was a surprising answer. Levine elaborated that the idea of sacrifice is supposed to be broader and more metaphorical than a straightforward sacrifice of one's life, but I think it's hard to read the sacrifice fate as anything but an homage to Rogue One, where its characters do give their lives to achieve an ultimate victory. To me, the arc of Rogue One is one in which characters come together, some willingly, some with doubts, and die to defeat the Empire. But Levine's thoughts on martyrdom are best expressed through her own words.
And going out and sacrificing yourself in a blaze of glory? We'd be lucky to live in a position where that mattered. We're not. That's not the situation we're in. The fantasy of doing that is really comforting. It's comforting for all the reasons I want going rogue to be comforting. To imagine one big moment we are confident enough is worth it enough to be willing to give our lives, and that being all we have to do. I want the player to experience emotional bleed from a character who is in a situation where they can do that, and they get that satisfying moment. I want you to get to have that satisfaction. But that's not the world that I and most people who are likely to play my game live in. That's not the work that needs to be done. I'm not suggesting that martyrdom is easy. I would never in a million years suggest that. But what I am saying is that for people whose lives are very disconnected from the actual reality of martyrdom, it's actually much easier to imagine martyring oneself than continuing to lose and keep fighting.
I think that in light of Levine's thoughts, this is the best way to read Going Rogue. It's a game about people who have done the work and are getting a rare chance at certainty. Perhaps not for the characters themselves, but certainty for the players, that their work was not in vain. I don't think rebellions are built on hope. I think rebellions are built on burnouts, on stupid kids, on people who do not think victory is possible because cynicism is a balm to the many burns hope leaves on your heart. And yet, it's those people who continue to show up, day after day, committing to the struggle in spite of their losses, who are the backbone of the resistance. While Going Rogue may end with a blaze of glory, the characters get there because in spite of their cynicism and frustration, even in the face of an enemy too gargantuan to comprehend, they believed it was worth fighting when victory seemed impossible. They kept the faith, again and again, until they won. Fighting the Empire is not heroic, most of the time. It is grimy, it is unpleasant, it is boring. You may never be in a position to know if your sacrifices were worth it. We just have to hope that one day, those sacrifices will create the certainty we lack. Until then, there is only the work and the people we do it with. Thank you to everybody for watching. I really appreciate anyone who takes the time to see what I'm saying about tabletop games. The names of the people who make these videos possible are scrolling by right now. If you want to become one of those people who helps me keep the channel going, you can join my Patreon, where members will get access to all my games, as well as the option to vote on a special video for the end of the year. My background picture is Liquefied Image by Adrian on Unsplash, and my profile picture is by Eater Outsider on Tumblr. If you want to find more of my work, I'm at AAVoit on Blue Sky, Monster Factory Fanfic on Tumblr, but my main site is aavoit.com, where I talk about games and writing. I also do a podcast, Mortified the Friendship Quest, where me and my friend Layla do critical media analysis. I think when this video drops, we'll probably have released an episode on Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express. Yeah, I've never read a Poirot novel, so I think it'll be a really interesting time to see what all the fuss is about. So if that sounds interesting to you, check that out, please. Thank you as always for watching. I don't know what my next video... Oh, actually, no. My next video is probably going to be about Spencer Campbell's Novaverse. I think it'll be interesting to connect the, intertwined narrative he's woven throughout his Nova games, and I think it'll be really interesting. So if you like sci-fi, you should check that one out. Well, thank you as always for watching. I will see you hopefully sometime in May. Bye.